Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to our evening of spooky storytelling. You have traversed the virtual forest. You're lost. You could have been pulled off the path, but you've made your way here. And while it is nowhere near midnight, you have made it here to the campfire. I am your host, Lisa Burton. And tonight, we have a series of 6 different pieces for you. Spine-tingling tales told by the people who experienced them. But first, I have for you a reading, a tarot card reading. Yes, I am masterfully skilled at telling the tarot. I have never before made someone die. Here, our first reading for you, dear listener. This is a clarity card. Let us flip it over together, shall we? The Ace of Pentacles. This is a great I'm gonna skip this part of this reading. You're safe and fine. And now I'm going to pass it on to our first speaker, Tyler Patterson.
Thank you, Lisa. This story takes place in 2013 when I was living in Chicago. I currently live in Maine now. I grew up outside of Boston. So I'm from the East Coast originally, which is where my family is. But in 2013, I was living at the corner of Belmont and Halsted. And Belmont and Clark, really. And as I was going to bed one night, it was probably around 1 o'clock in the morning, I couldn't sleep. And it's possible I drifted off into a dream, but I don't feel like I did because I was very aware and very with it. But I saw the spirit of a child walk into my room dressed like a newsie, so dressed in kind of 40s old-timey garb. And I knew immediately that his name was Charlie and that he was looking for coins. I don't know how I knew this, but I just knew it. I inherently understood it. And so I said, Charlie, what are you doing? Already knowing what he was doing. And he looked at me and said, I'm looking for pennies. And I, again, inherently understood that he was looking for pennies to buy penny candy. I don't know from where. I don't know if this part of Chicago was known for its candy, but he was in my room looking for pennies to buy candy with. And I just knew this. And when we were speaking out loud, we weren't actually saying anything. It was all inside of our minds, which made me think maybe I am dreaming this. So I didn't give much stock to it, but he stopped and he looked out my door of my bedroom and kind of got nervous and then scampered away. And the next thing that happened was the ghost of my grandmother and grandfather walked into my room and stood at the foot of my bed. Now, my grandmother passed away before I was born, so I never had a chance to meet her. I knew my grandfather. He passed away when I was 17 or 18 years old. And we always called him Gaga. He was a Navy veteran, fought in World War II. But my grandmother passed away before I was born, and she was always affectionately known as Gicky. So I never had a chance to speak with her. I've only known her from photographs, but I know beyond know that this was them coming into my room. I could feel it, that familiar connection. And when they came in, it was the same type of communication. Nothing verbal. It was all done inside of our minds. It was this knowing feeling, this knowing form of communication. And I said, I know who you are. And she smiled and she said, I know. You're writing about me, which was true. Over the years, I've been compiling a book of our family's relationship with the paranormal and kind of our haunted history. And so I said, yes, my grandfather sat down in this orange chair that I didn't have in my room, though, but it was apparently his chair. I found out years later. And he just kind of observed. And I started talking to my grandmother, who I've never had a chance to speak with. And I was asking her about all these things. All I know about her that was that when she would cook dinner, she would sing and dance in the kitchen, and that she loved cookies. She was very musical. She was from Canada by way of Wales. And so she had this very rich history of folklore and things like that kind of in her blood already. And she had 3 children, which are my father and my 2 aunts, Jean and Ellen. And so I said, have you been watching over us for a long time? And she said, oh yeah, yeah, for years and years and years. We see everything. And this is why I don't think it was a dream, because I had cognizant thought and I was reacting to the things that she said, but I also wasn't scared. It just felt like a normal occurrence that she was walking into my room the same way that my roommate would walk into my room. And so it wasn't a cause for panic. That familiar connection allowed me to stay in the moment and stay present. And I knew what she meant by that, that she's been watching us for years, because it's not uncommon in our family to get visits by my grandmother and grandfather. It's affectionately known in my family as a visit from the committee. And it often shows up to my cousins when they're dating someone new and that person is spending the night. The committee shows up in the mirror or in the dark window or something like that, just to check in. So we like to joke around that they got a visit from the committee. This is my first visit from the committee, though. And I was in my, late 20s at that point. And I got a little bold and I said, hey, Gicky, what's it like? And what I was implying was, what's it like to die? She passed away from cancer. And she kind of took a step back and she smiled. And she said, I'll explain it like this. Everything in the universe is made of vibrations. Therefore, everything in the universe is a song. When you find your song, you sing it forever. And I remember being so blown away by that. It was so profound that I got teary-eyed, very emotional. And my grandfather stood up from his orange chair that kind of dissolved behind him. And they looked at me one last time, and I was watching them and studying their faces and taking them in. And as they were leaving, Gicky turned to me and said, by the way, ask Jean, my aunt, about the staircase. I said, what about the staircase? And she said, she'll know what I'm talking about. Then they left, and I really drifted off to sleep, and I woke up the next morning. And when I woke up, I went to work. It didn't feel like something big had happened. It honestly didn't occur to me that this experience, this perhaps ghostly encounter, was a thing until I got to work. Not even on Monday, an entire day went by, 24 hours went by. And on Tuesday at work, I got a phone call from my dad at around 11 o'clock in the morning, which he would never do. I don't think parents really call their kids in the middle of the day unless it's an emergency. So the second he started calling, I got a little unnerved. And I answered the phone, and the first thing out of his mouth was, everybody's okay. Just know that. And I said, what happened? She said, your Aunt Jean fell down the staircase. She's older than my dad. She's has arthritis, and she's pretty fragile. And my Uncle Joe is a firefighter, but that was also the year of the Boston Marathon bombings, and they live in Somerville, right outside of Boston. So he was doing a lot of overtime extra work, so no one was home when she fell. I said, is she okay? He said, yeah, Joe came home for a break and found her at the bottom of the stairs. I said, that's crazy. And that's when the memory of those 2 nights ago, that Sunday night, really came back. And I said, Dad, you're not going to believe this, but I had a visit from the committee. And he said, what happened? And I explained what happened. And he said, you're not going to believe this. So did just about everybody else that I spoke with, except for Jean and Joe. I said, what did they say? And they gave me their variations, and it was very similar to my story. No way that could have happened otherwise. And I said, what do you think Jean saw at the staircase? Like, what do you think prompted her to fall down the staircase? Like, did she lose her balance? And my dad goes, we have no idea. She was going down into the basement, which she never does. And those are steep stairs. And thank goodness someone found her, because that could have been really bad. Thank goodness my Uncle Joe came home. And I said, I feel guilty. I feel like I should have called her on Monday and just checked in and say, hey, I got a call from, a visit from the committee last night. I feel like she would have enjoyed that conversation. My dad said, yeah, me too. And I felt even worse until he kind of clarified and said, I wish I would have called her too, because I also had a visit from the committee. and they were warning me about Jean in the staircase. So long story short, we took that as an omen that whenever these ghostly presences appear, it's not always for malicious purposes. It's not always for bad. It's not always for evil, but they are warning us about something that may occur, that might occur, that we don't have control over. But maybe what they understand as spirits that have passed on, they are tapped into a future that could be and a future that will be, and hint to us which path to take to manifest one of those. And so from that day forward, whenever I did receive a visit from the committee, because it was not the last one, I kind of heeded their warning, and really listened to what they were saying and unpacked the things that they were saying. And all things considered, it has led to some of the most impactful conversations I've ever had with my extended family. Because we don't talk about emotional things unless it's through the veil of ghosts. And so I think maybe that's what Giki was trying to empower us to do the entire time, was really, really talk to each other. So that was my 2013 visit from the committee.
Thank you, Tyler, for that spooky story. And now we're just going to scrap your tarot reading, because even though we all got the death card, we're going to go ahead and do a different reading, because lucky you, I'm very good at readings of all sorts. I've brought out all my crystals. We have many crystals here. All three of them are going to show you something in your future. And so let's go ahead and read what the crystals say. Will it be money? Do you want fame? Perhaps you want to spend an enjoyable day outside without thinking of anything going on in the world. The crystals have in store for you death. We're going to put this away, and the next speaker is Ashley Connell.
Hi. So my story is about murder and rampant capitalism. About 10 years ago, I was 19, and this is a disclaimer to absolve some of the guilt I feel about this story. I was 19, and I'm a very different person now. But when I was 19, I followed a boy that I was in love with to an island off the coast of Massachusetts, Martha's Vineyard. If you've never been there, it's lovely if you have a lot of money. And if you don't, which I didn't, it's sort of a beautiful place that you can't access fully. So I worked cleaning hotel rooms while I lived on the vineyard, and saw just truly the worst that the wealthy class has to offer. People who treat service industry professionals like they're subhuman, and who just take everything for granted. And I got to clean up after them and see all of the sort of nasty garbage that they would leave behind in their rooms. And they do very bizarre things. The rich people, the things I would find in the beds and the tubs at this hotel were truly too much to deal with. I worked at a very small, it was essentially a bed and breakfast. The cheapest room there was $650 a night. And the vast majority of people who stayed in this hotel were in sort of various deteriorating stages of couplehood. So it was a lot of married rich people who hated each other, people who had just gotten engaged who hated each other, people who were just starting to date who hated each other, who all had in common that they had a lot of money. But one time, there was a man staying there all by himself. And that was unusual because it was a bed and breakfast, and men don't usually stay in bed and breakfasts all by themselves. He was in his mid to late 50s, sort of a stocky, broad guy, and he was staying in the most expensive room in the hotel, which was room 11. It was at the very, very top of this sort of windy Cape Cod style seaside mansion. And it was notable because it had its own staircase. So you would go up the main staircase 3 floors, and then you would sort of walk down a hallway and then go up a separate, what used to be the servants' staircase, which was sort of narrow and isolated, and no one could see you when you were on this staircase because it was separate from the rest of the hotel. And the room 11 was all the way at the top of that staircase all by itself, and it was roughly $1,200 a night. So this man was staying there by himself, and myself and the only other maid at the hotel was this 18-year-old, very intimidating Eastern European woman named Yasmina, who I grew to love after initially finding her terrifying. And we would clean all the rooms every day. We cleaned the rooms more thoroughly when people were moving out of them, obviously, but on days when people were continuing to stay in the room, we would go up and fluff the pillows and make the beds and clean the bathroom, just sort of a maintenance clean. And so we started at the top of the building most days. And on this one particular day, Yasmina and I went up to room 11 thinking nothing, thinking truly just, talking about some nonsense that she was complaining about, or that I was complaining about my boyfriend or something stupid. And we walked into the room, and we walked to either side of the bed to pull the comforter down so we could change the sheets. And when we pulled the comforter down, the bed, from the foot of the bed to the pillow, was soaked in blood. It was more blood than I've ever seen, by a lot. And it wasn't like, oh, someone has injured themselves. It was a person amount of blood. It was a body's worth of blood. And we looked at it for a few seconds in shock. And then Yasmina, who up until this point I had thought of as being really kind of a tough cookie, just immediately went into full panic attack mode and collapsed on the floor and was sobbing and shaking. And I thought to myself, we have to get out of this room because we're seeing something we're not supposed to have seen. So I grabbed her and I pushed her out onto, there's a wooden fire escape that descends from that room. It's a separate, additional private entrance and exit to the room. I said, go downstairs, go in the laundry room and hide with Gabby, and don't say anything, don't talk to anyone, just go hide and calm down and breathe. And so she went down the fire escape. But I had to go out the front door because we had left our cleaning bucket outside the door to the hotel room. So if anyone were to come up the stairs, they would know we'd been in the room. So I pulled the comforter back up over the bed, and I walked out the front door and I locked it, and I picked up the bucket and I started down this narrow, isolated staircase. And then I heard someone running full speed up the main staircase of the hotel. And I knew that it was him, and that he'd just realized he'd forgotten to put up his do not disturb sign. So there's one other thing on this staircase, just one. It's about halfway down, a cupboard where we stored washcloths and pillowcases. It was a very small cupboard set into the wall. So I made my way down to the cupboard and I opened it just as I heard his footsteps come around the corner to the staircase that I was on. And he stopped at the base of the staircase and looked at me. And then he started to walk up the stairs towards me, and I continued to mess with the pillowcases, thinking, I just have no idea what he was going to do. And he walked up to me and grabbed my arm. And in my whole life, I've never had anyone touch me in this way. It was the most threatening contact I've ever had with a human being. And he looked at me in the eyes and he said, "Have you been in my room today?" And I said, "No, sir. We were just headed up there now. Is there something you need?" And he said, "No, you know what? You can skip it today." And then he walked past me up to his room. And I grabbed some pillowcases and I went downstairs. And I went to my manager, Fred, and I said, "Fred, I have to talk to you. We have to talk in private." And I pulled him into his office and I said, "Something happened in room 11. Something very bad happened in room 11. The man in room 11 did something very bad last night. There is an unbelievable amount of blood in his bed." And Fred said, okay, calm down. Just calm down, go and sit in the kitchen, have a water. I'm going to handle this. Don't worry. And I thought he meant he was going to call the police. But it turns out what he meant was that he was going to have Yasmina and I not go in that room again for the duration of this gentleman's stay. And the next time I went in that room, after that man had left, there was a brand new mattress in the room and no sign that anything untoward had ever occurred there. And when I told Yasmina that I needed to go to the police because someone had to do something, because obviously this man had murdered someone in his room and was going to get away with it because he had money, she told me, if you go to the police, they will kill me. They might not kill you, but they will certainly kill me. And I was 19 and I 100% believed her because she was terrified. And also because I had learned an important lesson about what the wealthy are allowed to do to a migrant workforce in an island paradise. So I didn't do anything. And I wonder to this day and occasionally Google the year that I was on Martha's Vineyard and the words murder and the Ashley Inn, and nothing so far has come of it. I wonder who that person was and what happened to them and what the cover-up was and what would have happened if I'd done something pretty frequently. So if you don't have money, I would say stay away from that island, just in general. Thanks.
Thank you, Ashley. That was horrifying. That was really scary. There's a murderer out there. Okay, well, speaking of murderers, you can know that all of the liquid on this table is blood. This is blood. And this is blood. And this is also blood. And now, the reading that I'm going to do for you is a blood reading. It hurts. Well, I can't really read it because my vision is getting blurry and we're all gonna die, so I'm gonna pass it off to our next storyteller, Susie Carroll.
Hello? So I have two daughters, a couple years apart, and their dad and I went out for the evening once when the younger one was in middle school and the oldest one was a sophomore in high school. And my little one told me that while we were gone, after they had both gone to bed, she felt something sit on the end of her bed that night and saw the outline of a figure, like a dark outline of a figure sitting there. And it said in her sister's voice, Megan, Megan, wake up. I need you. So it took a little while in her groggy state, but it dawned on her how odd it was that her sister would be able to get up into her bed because she had a bunk bed at that time. And she just kind of fell back asleep. But the next morning she confronted her sister and asked, why did you come into my room in the middle of the night, weirdo? You woke me up and scared the heck out of me. And my older daughter said, what are you talking about? I never got out of my bed. And she said, well, you were calling me. You're calling my name. And my older one said, no, I wasn't. And as soon as they both figured out that neither one was messing with the other one, they both got really freaked out. And the younger one came and told me what happened. Now, a normal person might have just let it drop there, maybe chalked it up to like sleep paralysis or something, like kids have issues, sleep issues. But I happen to work for the demonologist of the Joliet Diocese. He's not a full-blown exorcist. He's the next step down, but he's the closest thing that the Joliet Diocese has to an exorcist. And all but one of the cases he's gotten, and by the way, it was about a year before I even knew he was in this position because these cases are so very rare. And I learned that that's what he was when the receptionist Rita said to me, if you get a call from a guy from Fort Hood, put the call straight through to Father Paul because he's not crazy. I'm like, well, why would he be crazy? And Rita said, well, you know, because he's the demonologist and this is like a demon thing, a demonologist thing. And I'm like, no, I did not know that he was a demonologist, which, you know, thinking of all the weird shootings they've had at Fort Hood, that's a little weird. But anyway, those calls are in the minority. The huge preponderance of these sorts of calls that he gets are more like things that he winds up saying, Gary, you gotta take your meds. Do you need me to take you to the doctor? You gotta take your meds, Gary. Or, you know, new houses, they make these kind of noises when they settle. And there was one case where he said, you need to talk to your landlord about that gas leak because you're hallucinating. So my boss is actually more skeptical about supernatural things than the average person because he knows that they more likely than not have a natural explanation. So I get called into his office to talk about work stuff, and I'm a little nervous because he's also a stern person, but I get up the guts to say, I'm sure this is nothing, but Megan said that while Rich and I were out of the house, she felt something sit on her bed and saw kind of a dark shape, and it talked in her sister's voice. And instead of telling me, oh yeah, that's nothing, worse was he reached right back into his credenza and he pulls out his special stole, which is like that kind of a scarf thing that priests wear. And he pulls out this bottle of water, which I have kept, and this baggie of salt, which I have also kept. And he says these prayers over them to turn them into holy water and holy salt. And he gives me this booklet and he circles this prayer, which says, removing demonic influence. I've kept all of these things. And he says, so you take a candle, you light a candle. Oh, do you have a blessed candle? And I'm like, yeah, I have one from when the girls, when one of them got baptized. So I do have a blessed candle. I said, okay, you light the blessed candle. Then you take the salt and you sprinkle it in the corner. Then you take the holy water and you sprinkle it in the corners and you say the prayers, and there you go. You take care of the problem. Got anything else? No? Okay. So anyway, the auditors are coming over, so make sure that the books are all in order. And he just like goes on with business. Like this was nothing. Just, he might as well have been saying, change the toilet paper in the bathroom or something. And, that's how he is about demon things. And it's kind of freaky because, people will call and these poor people have, definite mental problems, but they'll say things like, the demon tells me to hate myself and that I should hurt myself and my mother is evil and like these things. And he'll go, that's not how a demon talks. Like, get a load of that guy. So anyway, I take this stuff home And I do exactly what he tells me to do. Put the salt and the water with the candle lit and the prayers. And a couple days later, I asked my daughter, did you have any more problems? Is everything okay? And she said, no, no more problems. Everything's great. Cool, that's great. But then my older daughter pipes up and says, yeah, it also made the shadow people in the bathroom go away. And I said, there were shadow people in the bathroom? And you never thought to tell me that there were shadow people in the bathroom? And my older daughter said, we were here when we bought the house when I was little, so I thought they were supposed to be here. She like takes a bite out of a cookie or whatever she was doing in the kitchen. And I'm just looking at her like, shadow people in the bathroom? She's like, what? They're gone now. And then she just leaves the room like I'm the crazy one. It also occurs to me that my younger daughter is currently in middle school, and my older daughter had some problems herself when she was in middle school. And I am not the only one in the neighborhood to think that there's something kind of evil in the middle school beyond the usual, because there's probably always kind of evil stuff in the middle school. But the plus side to this whole story is I now feel like some kind of badass Buffy the Vampire Slayer, demon killing, I can take care of anything. Nothing scares me, especially since I still have all this stuff. And that's my story.
Thank you, Susie. That story is incredible. And I feel great. I don't feel lightheaded or anything. So I'm gonna do another reading here while I still have consciousness. And this is a hand reading. I can read palms. So I'm gonna read these palms. And they say demise. These poems don't read well. It doesn't look good for us, everyone. It doesn't look good for any of us. So I'm going to pass it along to our next speaker, and that's Tom Wenzel.
Hello, everyone. Tonight I'm going to tell a couple of stories here, Chicago specific ghost stories right here. A lot of reason I want to bring this up is, other than COVID time, there's parts in the city where there's some extremely haunted things took place. There's very, very tragic things that people don't really think about. The first I'm going to speak of is an event that took place in the city's history. The date was July 24th, 1915. This was a Saturday morning. This morning was a picnic planned for a company located out in Cicero, the Western Electric Company. This was the day of their annual company picnic. Okay, I'm going to speak of location. I'm going to flip my screen real quick here, see if this works. If you guys are familiar with this building right here, right in front, this is the Chicago River. That's Clark Street. That's LaSalle. This building right here, this was called the Reed Murdoch Building. Okay, that building was built there in 1911. A little historical thing here that in 1915, Upper Wacker Drive did not exist. Okay, that was built later in the 20s. So basically what took shape over here was right even with the river. Okay, that's going to play an important part of the story. Another part too is that this part of the city was a very industrialized section. Okay, industry was built around the river and so forth. So on that particular day, as I mentioned a minute ago, it was a picnic planned. People working for the Western Electric Company were taking a trip out to Michigan City, Indiana for a picnic. Western Electric back then was a company out in Cicero with about 5,000 employees. There was 5 ships that morning. One of the boats I'm going to speak of was a ship called the SS Eastland. Here's a picture of it here. You guys can see the Eastland here is 279 feet. It's basically about 7 bus lanes here. Okay. This ship was called back in those days the Speed Queen of the Lakes. It was a very fast ship. For the time period, it was a luxury vessel. Okay. The ship was built in 1902 mainly as a cargo ship. And later on, they realized you can make more money making it into basically a luxury liner here. I'm going to show another picture real quick. If you guys can see over here, here's another picture of the Eastland here. And this is the actual day of people gathering to get on board over here. As I mentioned, the Eastland was known for speed, but the problem was it was a very structurally flawed ship. The ship was a very top-heavy, narrow vessel, and it had a long history of listing. Listing is when a ship will teeter like this from side to side. It was a very unstable ship. Owners of the ship knew about this. Okay, as a result, this ship kept getting sold every couple of years. Now, if you go back to 1912 when the Titanic sank, a federal law became in place that all passenger ships were required by law to put enough lifeboats on to count for every passenger on board. Now, for this particular ship, this was disastrous because what this did was it took an already top-heavy ship and made it more top-heavy. Okay. Now, that morning, passengers were boarding the vessel. Now, when the extra lifeboats were added, the ship's capacity increased to 2,570. This was more than double what this ship rightfully should have been. As passengers were boarding the vessel, one thing they noticed was that this ship had a habit of tilting from side to side like this. The captain, to maybe make things a little easier for people to aboard the ship, he ordered the ship ballasts emptied. Okay, the ballasts are these long tanks along the ship's hull that fill up with water to give a boat stability. He emptied them so the ship could float higher up in the water like this. Okay, and this day was a very exciting, festive day for these people. They were crowding aboard this ship. They're doing roughly 50 passengers a minute till it hits capacity a little after 7 o'clock. Now, the boat, as I mentioned, had a long tilt like this to the side. It was roughly right around 7:30 when the boat capsized. Now, what happened that morning was it was cabled to the docks, all the cables snapped, and the boat tipped into the riverside. Let's find a picture here to show you guys. On that morning, July 24th, 1915, 844 people died in the river, including the loss of 22 entire families. This event right here marks the single greatest loss of life in Chicago history. Let me show you a quick picture here. If you guys can see over here, that's the boat on its side right here. It might be a little hard to see on my computer. This building back here, as I mentioned before, that is the Reed Murdoch building. Okay, that's the only building still here from 1915 that's still here today. Now you may want to ask yourself, well, could these people swim? Could they do things to get out of the water? Well, a lot of the problem was that people in those days generally didn't swim. Another big factor was the clothing they wore. Back in those days, the clothing they made was all made out of wood. Okay, the clothing was all made out of wool. So, I lost my spot here. So the thing is, when wool gets wet, it's very, very heavy. A wool dress, when it gets wet, let me see a picture to show you guys here. If you guys can see right here how they dressed. A wool dress of this size wet weighed about 150 pounds. So when these people hit the water, they had basically no chance of survival. The majority of fatalities were below deck at this time. Keep in mind, most of these people were under the age of 25. The majority were crushed to death. Now you can see, I'll show another picture here real quick. Getting the bodies out of the water was another very arduous task here. Let me show you another picture real quick. If you guys look right here, here's one of many pictures of victims coming out of the water like this. It's a lifeless body coming out. What I'm going to show you guys next is probably the one that really sums it up here. Oh, here we go. If you guys look at the fireman's face here, I'll show you this picture. Look at the face of this man pulling this dead baby out of the water. That pretty much explains what took shape that day. Now, with that many victims laying in the water, the next question is, how do you identify the bodies? Where do you house them? Well, one of the famous makeshift morgues was about a mile west on Washington Street, a building called the 2nd Regiment Army Building. Here's a picture right here. If you guys look, This later on became Harpo Studios, where Oprah bought the property in the early 90s and made it into her studio. If you guys can see over here, there's a line down the street here, on Washington Street, over 2 blocks long, just to go through and identify the bodies. This is inside the building here itself. These are all the lifeless bodies just lined up. Now, these bodies lay in wait for about 8 days to be identified. Many were never identified. As I mentioned before, this disaster actually cost the life of 22 entire families. So many were not around to identify all the victims. It took about 3 days to get all the bodies out of this water. Eventually, everyone was buried or accounted for. A few were not, just marked and unmarked graves and so forth. As I mentioned before, this is Chicago's single greatest loss of life in the city's history. And you also know that people walk by that spot every day and have no idea what took shape there. There is a Eastland Historical Society. There used to be a plaque out there. I don't know if there still is or not. What I'm going to speak now are the hauntings from that spot. For many, many years, people claim to be drawn to the water over there. It's something that pulls in attention, pulls in focus. It's also believed you can never step in the same river twice because it's always moving. People have taken pictures out there. Many have claimed to see faces in the water looking back up at them. Orbs are very common out there. That's a very common thing to see. If you guys don't know what an orb is this white light that'll float across the screen like this, and it'll appear on your camera. It's very common to see faces inside of orbs if you blow them up. That's very, very common out there. There is another famous ghost that actually got caught on camera in this location, not at the river, but actually at Harpo Studios. It was in the 90s when, after hours, Oprah would do tours in the studio and so forth. Now, she said herself, she did not like staying in that building at nighttime. A lot of creepy things took place in there. They'd often hear pounding inside the building, moans, screams, things like this. Story was that a couple of security guards, one night working the desk, were watching a monitor. As they looked at a monitor down a long, dark corridor, they saw a woman walking by, a tall woman with a hat on, long gray dress like this. There was a very strong scent of lilac in the air, too. So one security guard instructed the other one to go down and escort the lady out of the building. Well, he went to the location she was at, and there was nobody in the hallway. When he returned to the desk, the other guard working the desk said to him, "Why don't you take that lady out of here?" He said, "Well, there's nobody there." They reviewed the monitor and found a woman standing right next to him on camera. Oprah's had that woman, had that video in her possession. She will not release it to the public. If you guys don't know about Oprah, she's a very superstitious woman, and there's things she won't go to, won't cross. Now, since that time, that studio has been sold and it's since been demolished. Now it's the McDonald's headquarters. So I don't know what's going to happen with that location over there itself. A couple other things too, it took place that morning. The one talk that people mentioned about that day was that Saturday morning, there's a lot of people working out there where the screams heard. They heard screaming from blocks and blocks away because it was so loud. There's thousands of people out that morning waiting to board these boats. And that morning, the river was flooded with hats. Everyone wore hats back in those days. And just thousands of hats flooded the surface of that water. Another factor too in that water right there is a very strong undercurrent, because that actually river has been reversed in flow. It flows away from Lake Michigan. So many bodies are stuck underneath there. It took about 3 days, they said, to get rid of all the bodies out there. Now, part of the reason this is not really well spoken about, and I'll keep this in mind too, more passengers died aboard this ship than died aboard the Titanic. The Titanic lost far more crew, but only 3 from the crew died on this ship. These are all just regular people here. This ship didn't have anyone wealthy or famous on board. These are just blue-collar immigrant people mainly from Eastern Europe at the time. The only man who was not famous then, who worked for Western Electric, who missed this by about 15 minutes, was the man who went on to buy the Chicago Bears, and that's George Hallis. He was scheduled to be on the ship that morning. He arrived about 15 minutes late, as I said, and he was one of many people that were in the area helping pull bodies out of the water. So as you can imagine, what took shape here was a great tragedy that really shaped a lot of the city's history and so forth. And that actually got laws changed too, because all boats after this time were required to pass safety inspections. That became a federal law after this. Now you may want to ask yourself, could these passengers have sued because they knew they were going on a ship, or they didn't know, the captains knew that the ship was not stable? Well, the problem was that the lawyers that the Eastern Company hired was a man named Clarence Darrow, who was arguably the top lawyer in the country at that time. And these people never got a compensation out of it. But if you're ever down in that area, down Upper Wacker Drive, Clark Street, LaSalle, when you take a look at that water, take a look and imagine what took place over there, the tragedy of this event, and how it shaped so many families and really devastated so many people out there. So a lot of these things just pass by in our minds. We don't pay much attention to them. But you can rest assured it affect a lot of people out there. And we don't want this stuff to get forgotten, but this was a very tragic day for a lot of people. So next time you're out there, just take a look at it. There should be a plaque out there. There used to be, I don't know if they took it away or not. But anyways, thank you for your time, guys, and thanks for letting me talk. Just stay safe.
Thank you, Tom, for sharing some of Chicago's history with us. Now, I feel great, honestly. My body's lying on the floor, and I recognize that I have a story to tell. And so, now that you all are in the presence of my ghost and you all have your own story to take away from this, I'm going to share with you my real life haunting story that happened to me in life. True to life haunting story that's a lot like a Hollywood haunting, except that it happened to me in my real life. So I'm going to share my video with you. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see. Now, this story happened to me a number of years ago. It's my true to life stereotypical haunting experience. In every good ghost story, you should get to know the speaker, and so you should get to know me and my life. I worked on cruise ships doing comedy. This is a photo that I took in Bermuda. And then I got married, and then I got divorced, because every good protagonist in a horror story goes through some kind of trauma. And then I got off of cruise ships, and when I left cruise ships, I needed somewhere to stay. So I stayed with my friend Tyler and his girlfriend Erin in this house. This is 1647 West Foster. It's a red house across the street from Ebenezer Lutheran Church on Foster Avenue. Now, when I lived in this house, I lived in this room. Please pardon the mess. This room was a nice big room, and it had that beautiful walk-in closet, which you can see just ahead with the door cracked just a little bit. While I was living in that room, weird stuff started to happen. I started to see dead birds everywhere, and it was the fall, so I recognized that bird strikes are pretty common. And I'm used to seeing dead birds around, but I would see dead birds day after day after day. And at one point while I was babysitting, I saw a dead crow, which felt weird because crows aren't normally like a regular bird strike type of bird. And then this happened where after a few weeks of seeing these dead birds everywhere, this spider made a web across the door frame of the house. And I'm a biologist. And so being science-minded and knowing a lot about the natural world, I know that spiders don't typically make webs across high traffic areas. And if they do, they don't do it day after day after day. So this was day one. I swiped the spider aside, and you can see right there in the middle, that little dot on maybe the fourth blue slat in on the porch. You can see that little dot, that is the spider. So this was the next day, and that happened for about 4 days in a row, that spider. So when these weird things start happening, I tend to start to document because, again, I'm science-minded. And so I want to document these things. I just kind of want to have them for my own, records to kind of look back on. So here's the spider again. So I took a few pictures here. And then there was a morning, I was walking on my way to work, and I saw a rat in front of me, and that rat started to sway from side to side. And I thought it was odd, so I started filming it. And I filmed the rat sway side to side, scoot under a bush, and die. And you can watch that video on my Instagram, which is where I posted it when it happened. I'm at Squid Pickle, so check me out. So what you're looking at here is the next layer of phenomenon that started to happen. So after I started seeing dead things and the spider thing happened, the rat thing happened, I started waking up from naps or at night, and the light in my walk-in closet would be on. Now that's what you're looking at here. This is in the middle of the day, as you can see by that window there on the right-hand side. And what was happening is I started having a series of nightmares. And the nightmares that I was having were regular dreams where I would be walking along a path, and there were these shadow people on either side of the path, and they sort of resembled the kids that I was babysitting. And they would try and pull me off of the path, but I could see something ahead of me that I wanted to get to. So I kept walking, and the minute that these kids would pull me off the path, I would wake up with a start to the light in my walk-in closet being on. So this started to happen so regularly that, again, I started logging it. I started documenting. So this was when I came home from a show, actually, and it was on. This was in the middle of the night when I woke up and it was on. And it was just happening again and again and again. So I started doing my research, right? This is the part in the movie, right? A stereotypical haunting experience where we'd start to do research. So what you're looking at here is where the house was located. That little red spot in the middle, that's the house. And you'll notice I just started circling the cemeteries on the maps that I found. This is a map shortly after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. And this is a map that was created of Andersonville, which is that neighborhood. So I started just doing some research on the neighborhood and seeing how far back I could go. So all the cemeteries in the area are circled right there. So I was kind of in the middle of all the cemeteries. And then I found out that the area was home to a number of different native tribes, and the indigenous people that lived on the land used the area as sort of a hub because of the ways the rivers interconnect and the Great Lakes right there. It was a great place for trade. And so the Iroquois, the Illinois, the Miami, among many others, the Potawatomi, the Fox, the Sac, there are so many tribes that used to live in this area. And so I looked into a couple of them because I was curious to see how they dealt with their dead. And the article that you're looking at here is an article that I found from 2013 from Rose Hill Cemetery. They were trying to dig up for a nature preserve, and they were finding a bunch of artifacts from those ancient villages, which I thought was really neat. So what you're looking at here is the way that the Miami tribe deals with their dead. So the Iroquois did mound burial, which is one that we've probably all heard of before, where there are multiple bodies in one grave. And that was, from what I read, so that their family members would not have to pass to the other side alone. So if a family member passed away, they would wait till someone else died so that they could bury multiple people in one grave together. The Miami, however, what you're looking at here, would build scaffolding, and they would hang their dead in the scaffolding, as you can see, or they would hang their dead up in trees. And that was because they believed that when you died, you walked a path to get to the other side. And on either side of that path, there were beings that would try to drag you off the path. And if you got drug off the path, then you would be in limbo on earth for all time. So then I looked into the area, the immediate area. So this is Ebenezer Lutheran Church, just across from the house I lived in. The stones that are on the base stones under this church, they read, if you walk up to it, they read 1908, because that was the year this church was completed. It was completed by the Swedish people who settled in the area. And it was their community center and their main hub for everything at the time in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And at the time, one of the things the church did was prepare the dead. I found a map, that map that I showed you from the late 1800s was a map that was showing plots of the area. And the only plot not listed on that map is the plot of the house that I was living in at the time. And I asked the historian at the Andersonville Historical Center, which is very small, but they're open a couple days a week. Go check them out. And she said that likely that's because that plot used to be the morgue for the church, which is why the plot wasn't listed as a residential plot. So they used to prepare the dead, possibly, likely, in that plot. And then they would, because they didn't want to prepare the dead on the same grounds as the church. So they would prepare the dead across the street and then bring them back over for burial. When I looked into how Swedish people and Norway people, which are my people, Norway, Norse, prepared their dead, my grandmother told me the story of how they typically will leave a candle in the same room as someone who's recently passed. And if the light is out the next morning, that's how you know that their spirit has passed on to the other side. But if the light is still on, then their spirit has remained. Then I moved over to 5050 North Sheridan, and I was sure that everything was fine. I was like, okay, all of that is behind me. Everything is okay now. And a couple of months into living there, and I show you this to see, 5050 North Sheridan is just down Foster a little ways, right in the same neighborhood. But this was my room, 5050 North Sheridan. And this is the what I would regularly come home to. So a couple months into living there, it started to happen again. So here's the living room area. Here's what it would look like when I would come home from shows, or if I accidentally took a nap starting at 3 p.m. and woke up at 8, which I want to do sometimes. So I show you this to say, if I die soon, feel free to, well, now I am dead, so I am a spirit. Feel free to hang my body up in a tree so that I can see my way to the other side. But an update, my friend Mike found himself hunting in, Reno, and he was in the middle of a bunch of sage. And so he got me a bundle of sage to burn. He dried it and he tied it for me. And I have it here, and I burned it, and nothing has happened since. So while I am a scientist through and through, and I don't necessarily believe in ghosts, I can't deny that I can't explain that. And so now that I'm a ghost here among you, I am going to invite the rest of Devil's Daughter here as a special treat to finish out our show we are going to do a conducted ghost story for you. A little improvised piece before we send you all along your way. So if the rest of Devil's Daughter would please join me here in our virtual show. Hello, hello. I'm going to turn down my lights, and Gretchen, take it away.
Welcome, everyone, and Devil's Daughter can join me in giving a round of applause for the ghost storytellers that were so wonderful this evening, including Lisa, who is now a ghost herself. As Lisa said, we are going to perform a never before told ghost story, which is still going to be very authentic and very scary because the spirits of the damned are with us. The way we are going to do this is we are going to all remain on screen, but when it is our turn to speak, you will see a light illuminating our faces. And when someone else wishes to speak and take over telling the story, they will shine. Go ahead.
They will continue the story.
And some of us have matches. So all I need before I can immerse myself in darkness is, first of all, I need Lisa to let me know that she is ready. She's ready. Excellent. Max is ready. Are you ready, Max? He needs to unmute himself so that we can hear him. Perfect. This is
I'm ready.
Garrett and Brad are ready. Excellent. Thank you, Maxie. And can I please get a suggestion? We're going to get our suggestion through the chat in our Zoom meeting, which our audience can't necessarily see. But any of our ghost storytellers who are still here, could you please give us a suggestion, which is the title of a never before told ghost story, or a word that we can use as inspiration for this ghost story? So please, somebody type into the chat something to inspire us, or I'm just going to ask my perfect, wonderful Mr. Tyrone's Bones is the suggestion for this ghost story. We'll begin. Do you hear those dogs barking in the distance? The dogs that howl and bay and bark and borf. They are Mr. Tyrone's dogs. Mr. Tyrone, the famous sea captain who died 200 years ago and left a pack of ravenous canines hungry for their master and hungry for the food that they would never get. Mr. Tyrone was an average caliber sea captain.
He was okay. He brought in a fair amount of fish, a fair amount of lobster. That wasn't really the cool thing about him. It was his dogs. And
You
he had
have to
so many
understand, in a different time, he might have been above average at bringing in fish. But at this time that he was living, everyone was bringing in a lot of fish. So he was an average fisherman for the time. For a different time, pretty good. For that time, not so good. So,
But when it comes to dogs, he could collect the dogs by the dozen. Oh, his ship was filled with dogs.
and we're talking any era. That's too many dogs for one boat.
So 200 years ago, he had collected a gross amount of dogs and kept them all on his property. And those dogs had to mate with each other.
When we say gross, we mean not a disgusting amount of dogs. We mean like 100 dogs, at least, a gross of dogs.
In fact, they're beautiful dogs. They're well groomed.
Tyrone
polite.
loved all of those dogs, each and every one of them, so much so that it prevented him from falling in love himself. Ms. Alabaster, who lived down the way, wanted to marry Mr. Tyrone, but he would never see it to completion. he
Because
wanted
when she came over to his apartment, she said, How many dogs do you have? Are you some kind of animal hoarder?" And he was like, "I love them. These are my babies. These are my dogs. Like, chill out, you know?" She was like,
And she tried to chill out,
"I
but she
don't."
could never chill out to the point that, she could chill out to completion.
So like 200 years ago, chilling out was a different thing. It meant, let's read some books, some Little Women and shit.
Exactly. The standards. It's like, I think it's like the back at the fishing. I don't want to go, I don't want to go back. I'm going to dip out.
Like Little Women was a really exciting thing to read back then. It was like reading Cosmo.
Top Harry Potter.
What?
The point is, he murdered her and he ripped out her bones and gave them to his dogs.
and they loved the bones so much that he did it over and over and over again until he had collected 52 souls. And the souls of these women and their bones still reek on his property to this day.
And you also got the dogs. So they're going nuts over the bones. And then you can see.
Yay! Well, thank you all so much for joining us this evening for our live campfire performance, virtually, of course, for you. I wish you a pleasant Halloween. Thanks so much to all of our storytellers tonight and also to Devil's Daughter. Please, everyone, stay safe, mask up, and definitely vote. Happy Halloween! Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo.